3 RAF squadrons bear the traditional names of German flying aces from the First World War. The former Fighter-Bomber Squadron 31, renamed Tactical Air Force Squadron 31 Boelke in 2016, named after Captain Oswald Boelke, who was killed in a flying accident in France on the 28th of October, 1916. The former Reconnaissance Squadron 51, now Tactical Air Force Squadron 51 Immelmann, named after First Lieutenant Max Immelmann, who was killed in action in France on the 18th of June, 1916, who, incidentally, has nothing to do with the 1964 invented by American advertising consultant and writer Jack D. Hunter for his novel. For the highest Prussian award for bravery, the Pour le Mérite, which is what this video is about. And finally, as the 3rd Air Force Squadron, the former Fighter Wing 71, since 2016, Tactical Air Force Wing 71 Richthofen, named after Cavalry Captain Manfred Freiherr von Richthofen, commander of the Fighter Wing, who was killed in action in France on the 21st of April, 1918. Known as the Red Baron because of the color of his aeroplanes, this officer, who was awarded the highest honors, is the most famous of all German fighter pilots of the First World War, both nationally and internationally. In addition, with 80 aerial victories, he is the undisputed #1 among all German fighter pilots. No, even among all fighter pilots of the First World War from all nations. After his death on the 22nd of April, 18, which the British had announced by dropping this note over the German lines, he was buried with military honors 10 kilometers north of Amiens in Bertangles by soldiers of the Australian Army. However, the following night, residents of Bertangles belonging to the Grand Nation vandalized the grave and even attempted to dig up Richthofen's body and make it disappear forever. An outrageous incident that the Richthofen versions in other languages keep silent about. In 1920, the French authorities ordered Manfred's reburial in the German military cemetery in Freicourt. At the request of his family, he was first transferred by the Reichswehr to Berlin on the 18th of November, 1925, then laid out on the 19th in Berlin's Gnadenkirche, also known as the Empress Augusta Memorial Church, before being buried with military honors by the Reichswehr in the Invalidenfriedhof Cemetery on the 20th. In his former grave in Freicourt, the 2 German soldiers, Sebastian Paustian and Franz Greiss, are now buried. In 1928, this memorial was inaugurated in Richthofen's hometown of Schweidnitz, which, like countless others in Germany, was destroyed by the victors after the war. Today, Manfred von Richthofen's popularity can certainly be compared to that of sports, music, or film stars of our time. To be seen with him, or even better, to be photographed with him, was almost a must. Whether for Kaiser Wilhelm II, the Empress, Chancellor Georg Michaelis, or Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg. But who knows today that Manfred had a brother 2 years his junior, Lothar, on the right, who was every bit as good a fighter pilot as his famous brother, and, with 40 kills, ranks 10th in the list of air aces, alongside Captain Oswald Boelke and Reserve Lieutenant Franz Büchner, who fell in battle against the Spartacists on the 18th of March, 1920, far ahead of First Lieutenant Max Immelmann with his 15 kills, for example. Manfred and Lothar von Richthofen had been inseparable since their youth, and flying together in the war had brought them even closer together. When Lothar, who was lying wounded in the military hospital, heard of his older brother's death on the 21st of April, 18, in the middle of the last major German offensive in the West, the Kaiserschlacht, also known as the Battle of St. Michael, or the Great Battle in France, he wrote home, "I know that I will miss Manfred every step of the way, for the rest of my life. How many times had we saved each other's lives? On his last flight, I let Manfred down. And the mother of the two flying officers, Baroness Kunigunde von Richthofen, pictured here in an older photograph, confided in her diary what can also be seen as a characterization of Lothar. Lothar loved Manfred more than himself. And these are not empty words. When it came down to it, Lothar would have sacrificed his life for his brothers without hesitation. Such a loyal friend was invaluable to Manfred. In a sense, he was the reinforcement of his own ego. Lothar was calm, fearless, and unmatched in courage. In this respect, he was every bit as good as Manfred. It was a matter of course for him that Manfred was in first place. He felt no envy. He was happy about it. In fact, Manfred von Richthofen is probably the most famous and best known of all German fighter pilots of the 20th century. Dozens of books in all languages have been written about him. A song was composed in 1966 in which he was shot down, which was then continued in 1967 with the return of the Red Baron. In 1994, he was made into a comedy film, sold as a children's game, and immortalized in a video game in 2006. And his grave in the von Richthofen family tomb in the South Cemetery in Wiesbaden is adorned with miniature versions of the famous red aeroplanes of his flying circus. However, a German-British film production from 2008, The Red Baron, was rightly panned by critics. Der Spiegel, for example, wrote that, contrary to historical facts, Richthofen was portrayed as a pacifist, with the moral appearing completely artificial, like a pacifist soap opera. But surely you now want to know who his brother, 2 years his junior and so close to him, was. This picture shows the Richthofen family in 1917. Lothar was born on the 27th of September, 1894, the third of 4 children of Captain Albrecht von Richthofen, an active cavalry officer, and his wife Kunigunde from the Silesian family von Schickfuss und Neudorf in Breslau, Silesia. His older siblings were his sister Elizabeth, born in 1890, known as Ilse, the future Red Baron, born in 1892, and Wolf Bolko, born in 1903. Here you can see the 3 brothers in the garden of their parents' house. 4-year-old Bolko, 11-year-old Manfred as a cadet, and Lothar as a secondary school pupil. He spent his childhood and school years in the Richthofen family villa in Schweidnitz, Lower Silesia. Since his great role model, Manfred, who was 2 years older, had joined the Ulan regiment of Emperor Alexander III of Russia, West Prussian No. 1, in Militz, Lower Silesia, as a cavalryman after attending the Hauptkadettenanstalt Groß-Lichterfelde near Berlin. Lothar, who was also an excellent horseman, followed suit. After attending the Schweidnitz Grammar School, also joined Bredo's Silesian Dragoon Regiment No. 4 in Lubin near Lignitz, which was popularly said to be, "Dragoons are half man, half beast, infantry on horseback." This was followed by attendance at the military academy in Danzig. When war broke out on the 1st of August 14, Lothar was an ensign and was initially deployed on the Western Front as part of his regiment. In September, he was promoted to lieutenant, and a month later was awarded the Iron Cross Second Class. Then, between the 27th of October and the 2nd of November 15, his regiment was transferred to the east, where Lothar earned a reputation as the division's most daring reconnaissance officer in Poland and on the Carpathian Front in Hungary. In March 1915, he was treated for an illness at the Charité Hospital in Berlin, and afterwards he was assigned to the replacement squadron of his regiment for recruit training. Back on the Eastern Front, he took part in several pursuit battles, followed by positional warfare in the Pripyat marshes from the 1st of October 15. But this increasingly stagnant war was not to the liking of the daring dragoon. especially since the age of cavalry was also coming to an end. On the advice of his brother Manfred, who had been serving as a pilot since June 15, he enlisted in the Air Force, where he underwent training as an observer from January 16 and thus experienced flying for the first time in practice, albeit not yet as a pilot. He was then transferred to Combat Wing 4 of the Supreme Army Command, which was the name given to the German bomber units set up for long-range operations in 1915. In Combat Wing 4, Lothar was assigned as an observer in Combat Squadron 23, where he flew with Lieutenant Karl Bohle, the grandson of Karl Bohle, founder of the milk retail company known to every Berliner. Bohle, who had scored 36 kills by the end of the war, was the last squadron leader of Boelke's fighter squadron and a Knight of the Order pour le Mérite. After spending Christmas leave together with Manfred at their parents' home in Schweidnitz, Lothar returned to Combat Squadron 4 in February 1916 and took part in the Battle of the Somme, which the prominent English military historian Little Hart described as nothing more than senseless mass mutual slaughter. Lothar's pilot training followed, with some interruptions, and in December 1916, Lieutenant General Ernst von Höppner, the commanding general of the Air Force, awarded him the Iron Cross First Class. During the Christmas leave he spent with his father and his brother Manfred at Fighter Squadron Boelke at the Brunville Airfield, Lothar made his first solo flight on December 25th. After a sick leave at home in February 1917, shortly after his return on March 6th, he passed his pilot's exam and, at the request of his brother, who had been leading Fighter Squadron 11 since January, he was transferred to him at the Douai-la-Bréelle airfield. The second plane from the front is that of the Red Baron. In Douai, Lothar had achieved such unprecedented success in such a short time that his brother remarked appreciatively that it was probably unique in the entire history of aviation for a pilot to have shot down 14 enemies 2 weeks after his third exam, and 20 enemies 4 weeks after his first. With Manfred, who had been awarded the Pour le Mérite on January 12, 17, and now Lothar, the successes of Jasta 11 had increased even further. Thus, on a single day, May 7th, they had shot down 11 aircraft from the British Elite Squadron number 56. Among them was also Captain Albert Ball, the most successful British flying ace up to that point with 44 victories. This shootdown was attributed to First Lieutenant Lothar von Richthofen on the German side. However, this aerial victory can't really be compared to the others, if it was even one at all. Although both top pilots had engaged in an intense battle in the stormy evening sky, constantly maneuvering around each other, Ball then crashed behind the German front and was killed. According to English sources, this was probably due to his engine failing, most likely because of a technical defect. However, it is also possible that he lost his orientation during the air battle and crashed because of that. In any case, Lothar's plane had also been hit, and he had just managed to land with his riddled, almost empty tank. A little later, Captain Ball was buried with a military funeral by German soldiers from the Douai airfield. On his cross, the noble phrase was written in German: "Fallen in aerial combat for his fatherland. English pilot, Captain Albert Ball, Royal Flying Corps." As I already mentioned, the German command credited this kill to Lothar von Richthofen as his 22nd, although the English had doubted this from the very beginning. They argued, according to a statement by former German captain Franz Heiler, who was the first to arrive at the crash site of Captain Ball with his brother Lieutenant Karl Heiler and 2 other German officers, Ball's aircraft showed no signs of gunfire and his body was also unharmed. In order to prove that Lothar on the right and Manfred were the winners of the dogfight, a German reserve lieutenant named Romberg fired his pistol at the wreckage to create bullet holes. In contrast, in 1961, Albert Ball's brother, Cyril Ball, reported that he had visited the crash site after the war. There, he met a French woman who claimed to have been the first at the crash site. She told me that she had pulled him from the wreckage and that he was still alive, although very weak. She said he had a head wound, and she held him in her arms until he died. During this time, he did not speak, but a few moments before his death, he opened his eyes. Both versions of Ball's death could be true, but even if the English version is correct, it would in no way diminish Lothar's outstanding flying skills. However, he was not bulletproof either. On the 13th of May, 1917, 6 days after the dogfight with Captain Ball, his hip was shattered by an infantry shell while pursuing an enemy aircraft in a low-level flight. 1 day later, on the 14th of May, he was awarded the Pour le Mérite. The picture shows him, his father, and Manfred on the left, on the 15th of May in Seclin, south of Lille, whose fortress had been occupied by the Germans in 1914. Shortly afterwards, Lothar was transferred to the Reserve Hospital Association's hospital in Hamburg for further treatment. Due to the severity of his injury, his recovery in the hospital took so long that he was only able to return to the squadron at the end of September 1917, with which he then took part in the Battle of Cambrai in November, the first tank battle in the history of warfare. After a short Christmas holiday spent with his father and brother at the air base, he was sent to Brest-Litovsk as an observer to the German-Austrian-Russian peace negotiations from the 26th of December 1917 to mid-January 1918. After that, an ear infection confined him to bed until he returned to Fighter Squadron 11 on the 16th of February, with further kills to his credit. Here are the 5 most successful pilots of Fighter Squadron 11. Sergeant Sebastian Festner, killed in action on the 25th of April, 1917. Lieutenant Karl Emil Schaefer, killed in action on the 5th of June, 1917. Captain Manfred von Richthofen, killed in action on the 21st of April, 1918. Lieutenant Lothar von Richthofen, killed in an accident on the 4th of July, 1922. And Lieutenant Kurt Wolf, killed in action as a first lieutenant on the 15th of September, 1917. Then came the 13th of March, 1918. When Lothar was chasing another opponent, his plane was hit by a burst of fire at around 4,000 meters altitude, which tore apart the upper wing and made the rudder unusable. He had just managed to make a crash landing in a clearing, but was severely wounded in the head and was transferred to a hospital in Dusseldorf for treatment. It was here, on April 21st, that he learned of his brother's death and wrote the lines mentioned at the beginning. It was the case that the brothers, who often flew together, had complemented each other perfectly in aerial combat. Manfred's motto was, "Wrestling is everything," which is how he described the absolute aerial combat against opponents who always outnumbered him 3-1. Both brothers always fired from very close range, with Lothar even exceeding Manfred in this. He often fired only shortly before being close enough to ram, and unlike his brother's tactical teachings, he also attacked from the front, succeeding 5 times. There is an impressive English account of one of these frontal aerial battles. Flying at low altitude, the 2 opponents flew directly at each other, firing their guns. A deadly game in which the English 2-seater had the advantage of an observer firing to the rear, who could shoot at the German at the moment the planes passed each other. But just before the collision, Richthofen's bullets hit, causing the English plane to quickly burst into flames, and the crew bailed out with their parachutes. It is noteworthy that, of the leading fighter pilots, only the 2 Richthofen brothers shot down more 2-seaters than single-seaters, with two-seaters considered the more dangerous opponents due to their heavier and more maneuverable armament. And something else is remarkable. Due to several serious injuries, Lothar had only been at the front as a fighter pilot for a total of 77 days, of which 20 days must also be deducted as bad weather days. During this time, he had 40 confirmed aerial victories. That was exactly half the number of kills of his brother standing to his left, but he had achieved them in a relatively shorter period of time. Also, considering the ratio of the number of kills to the number of missions or days at the front, Lothar von Richthofen was one of the most effective and best German pilots of the First World War. Maybe even better than his brother, because out of his total of 40 confirmed victories, Lothar achieved 33 in just 3 months, 15 in April 17, 8 in May, and 10 in August 18. After receiving the distressing news of his brother Manfred's death, Lothar could no longer bear to stay at the military hospital in Dusseldorf and, still not having regained his full eyesight, effectively deserted to the front in Douai on the 19th of July, where he led Fighter Squadron 11 from the 19th to the 27th of July, until, on the 12th of August, he was again seriously wounded by a shot to the thigh, rendering him unfit for frontline service for the remaining 3 days, 3 months of the war. About 7 months after the end of the war, on the 5th of June 19, Lothar had married Doris, a descendant of the old Westphalian noble family Kaiserling in Kamerau, Lower Silesia, 6 kilometers west of Lothar's hometown of Schweidnitz. She died on December 20th, 1945, at the age of 44. From this marriage, their daughter Carmen Viola was born in 1920. She married Bernhard Wilfried Vogler on May 26, 1946, and died in 1971. And in 1922, their son Wolf Manfred was born. He served as an officer in the Second World War, later became a successful entrepreneur in Sweden, and died in 1990 at the age of 88. In contrast, her father Lothar had turned down lucrative job offers in business because he was determined to fly again instead. However, as the Treaty of Versailles had banned a German air force, in the 1920s he became a postal and transport pilot for Deutsche Luftreederei, the predecessor of Deutsche Lufthansa. Here is one of their airplanes, with the prominent singer and actor Hans Albers on board. On July 4, 1922, on a flight from Berlin to Hamburg, Lothar had 2 passengers on board, the American, but more well-known in Germany, film actress Fern Andra, and her partner, the producer Georg Bluen. When the engine suddenly failed during the approach to Hamburg Fuhlsbüttel Airport, Lothar managed to lift his plane over rooftops, fences, and telegraph poles before flying into the treetops, which were supposed to soften the impact of the crash. And indeed, his maneuver had been successful for his 2 passengers, who had both been seriously injured but had survived. But he himself was so badly injured by the engine that was pushed into the cockpit that he died just a few hours later in the hospital. A week later, on the 11th of July, Lothar was buried next to his father Albrecht, who had died 2 years earlier, by his former flying and war comrades at the Schweidnitz Garrison Cemetery. The grave no longer exists. It was probably destroyed after the war. Today there is a public green space over it. A stone on the family grave in Wiesbaden commemorates Lothar von Richthofen, the third of the Richthofen brothers, Bolko, born in 1903, who had experienced the end of the war in 1918 at the Cadet Academy, died in Baden-Baden in 1971. Lothar's older sister, Elizabeth, Ilse, born in 1890, died on the 2nd of January 1963 in Cuxhaven. She had married Wilhelm Freiherr von Reibnitz on the 28th of August 1920 in Schweidnitz and had at least one daughter and two sons. The eldest, Manfred Freiherr von Reibnitz, died on the 29th of January 1945 at the age of 23 during the Battle of East Prussia near Amalienhof, east of Gumbinnen, as a first lieutenant in the Heavy Tank Division 505. As far as Lothar and especially his famous brother Manfred are concerned, numerous internet blogs today make the most amazing comparisons with English or American fighter pilots from both world wars, with their aircraft and armament, the weather, general sensitivities, and also the various tactics from left and right and from top to bottom. But unlike these amateur warriors, the two Richthofens had only one basic rule, summed up in 3 sentences. The fighter pilot flies in the area assigned to him. When he sees the enemy, he attacks and shoots him down. Everything else is nonsense.